Welcome back to part 2 of our exploration into the global history of human bondage. In this segment, we examine the system that redefined the world, the transatlantic slave trade. Beginning in the late 1400s, European powers began the forced migration of over 12 million Africans across the Atlantic. This was chattel slavery. For the first time, human beings were legally defined as property for life, and their status was hereditary. It was an industrial-scale operation driven by the demands of the emerging global capitalist system. The white gold, sugar, along with cotton and tobacco, required immense labor that the European powers sought to exploit. The Middle Passage was a horrific journey of weeks or months, where millions perished due to disease, abuse, and despair. Critically, this system birthed a racial ideology. It wasn't just about conquest anymore, it was about defining a race as inherently inferior. This racial logic was used to justify the permanent, hereditary nature of the trade, creating a social hierarchy that persists today. Brazil and the Caribbean received the vast majority of enslaved people, building the wealth of empires in London, Lisbon, and Paris. But it was also a history of fierce resistance. From the Haitian Revolution to the Underground Railroad, the enslaved fought back. Every day was an act of survival and defiance, preserving culture, music, and dignity against a system designed to strip them away. By the 19th century, abolitionist movements, driven by both moral outrage and the agency of the enslaved, began to dismantle the trade. While the Atlantic trade ended, other forms of servitude continued elsewhere, often overlooked in the same history books. In the Ottoman Empire, slavery was a pillar of state power. The Janissaries were elite soldiers, technically enslaved to the Sultan. Recruited from Christian families in the Balkans through the devshirme system, they could achieve immense political influence. In Asia, systems of debt bondage and imperial labor drafts were common, often tied to caste or localized social hierarchies. Unlike the Atlantic system, these were often temporary or linked to specific financial obligations, though no less restrictive. In the Americas, European indentured servants also worked under harsh contracts, often for 7 years in exchange for passage. While brutal, indenture was legally distinct from the lifelong hereditary chattel slavery imposed on Africans. The global landscape of unfree labor was a mosaic of different legal, social, and moral frameworks. So, if slavery was so diverse and global, why does our modern conversation focus so heavily on the transatlantic system? First, the sheer economic scale. The Atlantic trade was the engine of the Industrial Revolution and modern global capitalism. The wealth built from sugar, cotton, and tobacco literally constructed the infrastructure of the modern Western world. Second, the unique legacy of racism. The racial ideology created to justify the trade outlived the trade itself. The ongoing struggle for civil rights and the visibility of abolitionist history in English-speaking nations keeps this story central. In contrast, other slave systems are often less documented or discussed in ways that don't fit into modern political frameworks. This selectivity isn't accidental, it's a product of whose stories were recorded, preserved, and amplified. Acknowledging that slavery was global doesn't minimize the horror of the Atlantic trade. It provides necessary context. When we only see one part of the story, we lose sight of the universal human capacity for both cruelty and resilience. History is rarely a simple story of victims and villains, it's a complex web of systems, power, and survival. By looking at the global picture, we can start to see how narratives are shaped by those who hold the pen. If history is always selective, whose stories are we still missing today? What parts of our past are still in the shadows? Behind every system, there were individuals with names, families, and dreams that history often forgets. In summary, slavery was a nearly universal human experience, but each system had its own unique mechanics and legacies. The transatlantic trade was uniquely racialized and industrial, leaving a scar on the modern world that is still healing. But understanding its global context allows us to use history as a tool for systemic understanding, not just blame. We invite you to look deeper into the stories that aren't in your textbooks, because history is only complete when we hear everyone. Thank you for watching. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep looking at the global picture